after we do each stitch pattern, and actually before we do the first stitch pattern, we do a beaded divider. And I'm going to take a minute to show you the beaded divider, and I'm going to do it without beads because I know some of you are choosing not to use beads in your projects, and so I just thought I would show you what to do here. So I am going to knit a row and purl a row and stockinette. And this, I'm just doing this kind of to show you how to do it without beads, but please, please, please make sure you watch the pattern carefully, because there are 4 different variations on the beaded divider, depending upon whether there is an increase required or a decrease required, or both an increase and a decrease, or no increases or decreases. So those are all the different options with this beaded divider, and you want to make sure that you know which one is which. So keep an eye on the directions, either the written instructions or the charts, so that you know which beaded divider you're doing. And because I'm doing a swatch, we'll see if my stitch count works out. All right, so I have done that. So I have 2 rows of stockinette there. And now I need to grab some yarn to use for my contrasting color. I have the yarn I'm going to use for my contrasting color, and the pattern, the instructions say to use color C for this. That's really flexible. If you have a different color you would like to use, by all means, go for it. The pattern has you knit 2 stitches and then place a bead. Instead of placing a bead, we're just going to slip that stitch and then knit the next 2 stitches, slip a stitch, knit the next 2, slip, and we do this all the way across the row. It is actually very similar to what we were just doing with the stitch pattern 1. So on the back side, we are purling, and we're going to slip the stitches that either we slipped before or that we put a bead on before. Okay, so the idea of this is that even if you're not using beads, it will add a little interest and contrast here in these dividers and give us a nice little separation in the stitch patterns. So, and you would cut your yarn there, and then we'll pick up and do 2 rows of stockinette with color B again. It's funny, looking at my actual shawl and the beaded dividers, I have silver beads in there, and they're so pretty, but they're not super high contrast with the gray of my variegated yarn, so they don't show up very well in the pictures, but in person they just catch the light and glimmer, and I love them very, very much. So what this will do, and what's interesting to me, is that on my pattern you don't get the same sort of window box type look as you'll see we have here when you do it without the beads, because it shifts the focus. In the ones with the beads, it shifts the focus to the beads, whereas without the beads, the focus is more on that contrasting yarn in the background kind of peeping through. So all sorts of things to consider. And here you can see I've got just those little pops of color from that contrasting yarn. And that's popping a lot because my yarn is such high contrast, my, if we look over here at this beaded divider, you can kind of see my beads. There's not as much contrast there between my variegated and my medium color, and so it doesn't pop as much. Plus, the bead is breaking up where that slip stitch would be showing that more of that window effect. So it's up to you which effect you want. Maybe you want to do different effects between the different stitch patterns. That is entirely your choice. But whatever you decide to do, make sure you do refer to the pattern to see if there are any increases or decreases that you need to account for. Okay, we are going to move on to the next stitch pattern.